everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on today our today's debate is technology is making many jobs obsolete. So we have two teams. One is a government, and one other one is opposition. From the government side, it will be led by Professor Rob, Professor Edwards, and Mr. Willie. Opposition side, we have Professor David Smith and Professor Donald. First, because of our time issues and physical issues, I want to give chance Professor Edward.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And I apologize for my coughing. I'm just getting over COVID. So hopefully I will have a victory over that very soon. But I will take the side of yes, technology is eliminating jobs. And that has been the case since human beings invented the wheel. It eliminated jobs. We could do things more efficiently with the wheel, and so people were freed up to do other things. Of course, the Industrial Revolution, which started in Europe, basically in Britain and England, several hundred years ago, eliminated a lot of jobs. In other words, we didn't need hundreds of women sitting in a workhouse sewing together shirts because we could have fewer women. They were usually women, and a bunch of machines doing the same thing. Of course, what this did is it brought down the price of shirts and many other things. And so more people could afford those. And therefore, investors and capital and the people who had saved money were able to put it into producing other stuff. And so the labor and the workers went to do other things. That is the natural course of things. Technology basically it allows certain kinds of work and efforts to be done better, more efficiently, cheaper by machines, and therefore people are freed up to do other stuff. This is a good thing. This has produced middle classes in the developed world. We see, of course, middle classes emerging in many, many Asian countries and the like. So, yes, of course, it's going to eliminate jobs. There's going to be a difference in the future, however. First of all, exponential technology is speeding up the process much more. It used to be that it could take decades or centuries for an industry to be established and for labor to move from one sector or set of professions to another. That happens at a much quicker pace these days. I mean, even if you look at a simple example like Kodak, up until the late 1990s and even early 2000s was one of the biggest companies in the world, employed tens of thousands of people with billions of dollars in revenue. And within less than a decade after it, because they weren't able to make the transition to digital cameras, Kodak was pretty much bankrupt. Was that a problem? Well, if you were working for Kodak, of course, it was a problem for you individually. But no, it's because we now all have digital cameras that are much, much better than the Kodak. I used to develop film myself, by the way. I used to work at a plant that developed film. So I knew the whole process. I worked with Kodak, okay? It's not a problem. Yes, we eliminated jobs. But it's not only a matter that the exponential technology is moving faster, it's also a matter that the exponential technology is more and more going to be moving into replacing human labor for certain kinds of professions. Certainly financial services, things like legal analysis is something. Artificial intelligence is being used for a lot of medical research, and a lot of it is excellent. You're not going to eliminate doctors, by the way. You're still going to need physical people. It's just going to be doing different kinds of things. And it's going to be construction, many, many things. Yes, you're going to eliminate certain kinds of work, and that is a good thing. Here's the challenge. Certainly, certainly in the United States and in many other countries, there's a huge disconnect between the schooling system and the needs of innovators and entrepreneurs and companies for the proper talent and of people, especially young people graduating from high school or college for remunerative and fulfilling work. There's a huge disconnect. And in the United States is certainly in part because the most of the schooling is controlled by government. Government is very, very slow to change things. Give you a personal example. I've been reaching out to people who work for boards of education and universities and so forth to get to develop future studies program. And just changing curriculum is very, very difficult in many, many cases. So what we're going to need in the future is an education revolution, so that the needs of the market, the needs of businesses, and so forth will line up with the education system. One way to do that, by the way, is through apprenticeships. 70% of Swiss kids go through an apprenticeship program. Only about 4% maybe of American kids, perhaps 5%, go through an apprenticeship program, a learn and earn program. The other thing is, because the labor market is going to be changing quicker, we're going to need more and more just-in-time talent, meaning that instead of, as we have in this country, we have a system where the government takes money out of your paycheck for unemployment. If you lose your job, you get some of that money back, so you can look for a new job. We're going to need a system emerging for a subscription, for example, for lifelong learning. So if it looks, my industry is changing, my talents are not going to be needed as much, I basically can simply go to my to a program that's going to help me train and upgrade my skills for the next round of what is needed in the market. So yes, obviously technology eliminates certain kinds of work. It's been doing that since the wheel was invented. That is a good thing. What we need is systems that, just like the free market, eliminate certain jobs because things get so good at producing goods and services. We're going to need the same thing in education. We need an education revolution. So I assent to the question that Sharif has put forward to us, even as my voice fails. So thank you very much, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor Edward. I think you should take some rest, and wish you all the best. And you can leave. I want to get into the main debate. First, I would like to give chance our Honorable Prime Minister for today's Parliament, Professor Rob, and thank you, Professor Talib, for joining today's session.
All right. So the House proposes that the technology will displace jobs, and it's well supported. Looking back at the 2027 McKinsey and Company report, they did a detailed report on the impact of technology on jobs, and they concluded that by 2030, around 39 million Americans would lose their jobs due to a shift toward automation. Nearly 50% of the hours spent on work-related tasks could be automated by this time. It's dependent on the speed of adopting technologies. I should point out that this was done prior to the pandemic, and every indication is the pandemic actually sped up all of these metrics pretty much across the board, because it created massive worker shortages, and automation is being used to fulfill those at least attempting to be used to fulfill some of those shortages in some interesting areas that I'll get to in a minute. Approximately 2,000 work-related activities across 800 professions have the potential to be automated. 81% of predictable physical work-related tasks could be automated by adopting existing automation technologies. By the way, this part of the report points out that the metrics are actually lagging potential. That the industry could move far more quickly than it was moving at the time in 2017, and we're seeing right now that industry is stepping up to that particular requirement and starting to move at the pace that McKinsey indicated they could move. One of the interesting statistics is that mortgage origination in the United States had the highest potential for elimination. It kind of showcases that automation works incredibly well with form-based industries, with 88% of the people working in that industry at risk at this particular point in time by 2030. And that jobs that require high school level education or less are more susceptible to being automated. I have seen, by the way, a contrary position at Dell World around 2017. I attended a session. The folks that were speaking on Industry 4.0 actually was the fourth industrial revolution. spoke about the fact that actually more expensive jobs were more likely to be replaced because you could better justify the cost of the automation to replace somebody who was more highly paid than somebody who was paid hourly. In fact, I was just in Barcelona this last week and seeing that in action. The example on the assembly line that I was shown, it showcased that people were cheaper than robots that do a number of the underlying tasks. So if you watch the task, I don't know why anybody would want to do them, but the fact was that they were cheaper. And you might remember that there was a generic robot that was released. Baxter was released about a decade ago. It failed as a general replacement for an assembly worker because the human worker was cheaper to use than the machine, even though the machine only cost $20,000. Putting the point to the fact that they may have been actually correct that the more expensive jobs, the ones that are based on analysis or reviewing data, much like we talked about just a few minutes ago, are vulnerable because computers are really good at analyzing data and coming up with conclusions. It's kind of what they do. While physical labor, if it's within the realm of people, it still can be done pretty cheaply for minimum wage. As we look at this expanding, let's look at some more stats. As we're looking at this, over 2% of Americans, 7 million people, lost their jobs in mass layoffs between 2004 and 2009. Workers without college degrees were at particular risk at that time, showing historically that we've lost jobs over automation, and that the emphasis now should shift in education to helping kids understand that by the time they come out of college, the job they're working for may no longer exist. And so teaching them to be flexible and to be able to shift on the fly from one area expertise to the next would be critical to assuring that the jobs that will need to be filled at that time will have the people to fill them. The issue or the problem we have is to a large extent, governments seem to be ignoring this potential for massive displacement. And so programs that should be funded to address this cross-training capability and ensure that people are trained for particular jobs are not being created, and they need to be created and implemented. They need to be created and implemented before now. The class of jobs that they're looking at, going back to McKinsey Global Institute, looking at workers between the age of 18 and 34, and this is looking at US stats, about 804,000 of them will lose their jobs. In that same category, aged over 50, about 217,000 will lose their jobs, all by 2030. Retail sales people are at risk. 567,000 will lose their jobs in the 18 to 34 category, 324 over 50. I should point out that both groups are at risk because they tend to operate in very vulnerable jobs, young people coming into market, and older people that are still relying on relatively low-skilled jobs. They tend to be the ones that are targeted, at least by this McKinsey study, as being exposed. Interesting to point out, the study said that secretaries and administrative assistants were at reasonably high risk. It's also interesting to point out that they recognize that more of those people were older. So nearly 500,000 people, 50 and plus, are at risk. We're only about 251,000 people 18 to 34. Of course, I read this, I'm going, who still uses secretaries or administrative assistants anymore? But it's nice to know that some of them exist. Apparently not a lot will exist after 2030. And of course, bookkeeping, accounting, and auditing are also at risk. Computers do those jobs fairly well. And again, the impact's going to be larger on older people than on younger people because older folks tend to occupy those jobs at a higher percentage. So about twice the number of older people in their 50s will be affected. Well, maybe a little more. 179,000 between 18 and 34, and 435,000 that are in their 50s or older. So in the end, people, there is no doubt, whether it's PricewaterhouseCoopers, whether it's McKinsey, they're in agreement that these jobs are at risk and automation will remove them, suggesting the impetus needs to be on making sure that the students who are training right now can be retrained as they need to be as they come out of school to address the new job opportunities that will also emerge, and that people in these jobs that will be displaced in particular have a path to retraining. As we get older, we don't like to retrain and people tend to resist this. That means there need to be incentive programs and aggressive education programs to allow the people that are most at risk to retrain out of them. And looking at the surveys of employers, 43% of employers are still cutting down on their workforce to make way for technology education integration. That's 43, nearly half of the employers are already planning on cutting their workforce as they roll out technology, and that's problematic because there's no offset to that. That's a direct loss in jobs in terms of industrial planning, and these are the guys that set policy. So it's whether or not it could be done a different way. Right now, in plan, it is not going to be done a different way, which means the government needs to step in and either provide programs to assure those folks don't become homeless, or provide programs that they can retrain and spin up companies that can use those people that have been laid off to do other things. We can't look at this and ignore the potential for massive amounts of homelessness and people that are unemployed, because that can lead to regime change and massive public acts by these unemployed people as they object to the fact they can no longer afford food or housing. So it does become a governmental problem to solve. It does look like industry, in terms of planning, is not stepping up to the problem, and that means government should step in. So the government at least temporarily rests on the concept that technology will in fact remove substantial numbers of employees from their jobs, and that government needs to step in and make sure that those employees have someplace else to land and have the skills they'll need to operate in the new jobs that will be created.
Thank you, Professor Rob. From the government side, we have our honorable analyst for our debate, Dr. Talib Rafael. Sir, do you have any point of information to Professor Rob? Anything you want to ask, or anything you need to clarify for our audience?
Thank you. I just want to emphasize what has been said about the fact that this is not something, it's not a choice. We don't have a choice in this. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. No jobs are going to be lost, because many of the people that lost their jobs during COVID are now not going back to their old jobs. They're starting their own startups. And that's going to be the trend for young people. Our educational system has to evolve with that. Our educational system has to try to train people, not to do specific jobs, but to train people how to think, how to be more creative, how to do things in a more flexible way. That's the education that we need. That's the revolution that was referred to, that we need. We can't keep going like this. And technology, no matter what, we must trust technology, must trust in development, not because we have to, but because it's going to be a fact, whether we like it or not. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Talib Rafael. Mr. Rob, do you want to respond at this point of information?
I think we're in agreement. However, as we know with regard to startups, the failure rate in startups is exceedingly high, and so depending on startups to pick up the slack probably won't be viable unless the government steps in and better assures the success of those startups. Some countries do that very well. A lot of countries do not. But the care and feeding of these startups to assure that those jobs remain in the country is going to be critical. As we've seen with past waves, what often happens during these waves is the jobs move to a country that has been aggressive in creating the opportunities for those jobs and away from the countries that do not. And so while Talib is absolutely correct, the jobs can move to startups and new enterprises, we have to assure that those startups and new enterprises are successful here and the jobs don't migrate overseas as this transition occurs.
Completely agree. Completely. It's government responsibility. Completely agree. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We want more of your explanations when you get chance as a debate analyst. So this is very important point, government responsibility for help this startup, even this COVID challenging situation. Now I want to request our honorable opposition leader for today's parliament, Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, thank you for letting the opposition have a voice in here, because it's very interesting as you look at the statistics, and there's no saying there's statistics and there's damn statistics, and that kind of goes when we look at this topic. Technology is, of course, really a double-edged sword. For example, fire can cook our food, but fire can also burn us. And that's kind of what you see in technology. The government uh, cited a conference he attended at Dell World. And at that same conference, Gartner presented a paper that said that 85% of the jobs that will be available in 2030 have not been created yet. And so, in one hand, you've got the place where technology does displace some jobs, but you also have a place where technology creates a tremendous amount of new jobs. And many of the jobs that will disappear are jobs that will also be redefined as opposed to being eliminated. And we're seeing that a lot as we go forward. I mean, I can remember as a small child walking into a building and see a wall after wall of operators manually moving plugs to connect telephone calls within an office. Boy, those switchboard operators aren't around anymore, but were they replaced with new jobs? Yes. If you go back and look at the early part of the 1900s, when they had bowling alleys, they had people down physically resetting the pin setters. Does that job exist anymore? No, but we continue to see technology change and technology advance and actually create more jobs. The really big point as we look at this is technology has always fueled economic growth. And we see that going back through history. The government cited places where we went from steel and iron up to where we are today. Now, did that replace some jobs? Yes, but it created hundreds of thousands, millions of new jobs. And it opens up the better standards of living, new avenues for new and better kinds of work. And if you look at recent advances that we've talked about on these programs, such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomously, which is bringing us things like self-driving cars, we're beginning to see a shift in our world where we're moving to have opportunities offered by these new technologies. But we have to continually update our skills and look at other ways to use our capabilities. The report by Gartner at 85% of the jobs in 2030 don't exist yet is 100% right as we're seeing these opportunities go. The use of augmented reality has created a whole new type of employment that people are beginning to move to. We're also seeing that, yes, we're shifting some of the tedious jobs. I agree with the government that many of the jobs in areas like accounting, legal research, and actually intellectual property in law are going to be disappearing. But then that's going to allow us to shift those jobs into more productive arenas, which in turn will create more jobs. What the government often forgets here is they always see the cup as half empty. But yet reality is when you look at the pace of technology, the growth of technology, the ability to fuel economic growth, that economic growth is what benefits our country. That's what benefits our citizens here. And that economic growth, fueled by the growth of technology, is what creates all these new jobs. Will some people be left behind? Yes, they're always left behind. Back in the early 1900s around the world, one of the professions was people going out on frozen lakes and sawing out blocks of ice to preserve food. Did that job get lost? Yes. But it created a better outcome for humanity as we began to apply technologies to preserve food. And, you know, the government talked about the machine ages, and there's been two machine ages really. And we're going by things we see in the current one, exponential increases in computer power driven by Moore's law. The ability of digital technology to not just be isolated in a few industries, but to become pervasive across most of our industries today. And when that digital technology becomes pervasive, what does it do? It creates more jobs, more opportunities. You know, I don't think 100 years ago we had technical support teams. I don't think we had customer service delivered the same way as we do now. And so those are new jobs, new opportunities that fill the lower end of the spectrum, as well as we see growth in the upper end of the spectrum. And one of the things that technology has done that was missing for many years is technology has created the growth of whole new segments of our population. You know, it has helped create our creative ability to build off of ideas like building blocks in order to create new innovations. And that is called recumbent growth. And that is really what Dr. Talib was talking about earlier as we look at how we're going to use technology to create new companies, how we're going to use technology to create new jobs, how we're going to use technology to enhance our quality of life, to enhance our GDP capabilities. And these 85% of the jobs that haven't been created yet by 2030, what's going to drive it? It's going to be the innovation of our citizens, fueled by the rapid innovation in technology that will be creating these new jobs. Will some be lost? Sure. But stagnation is not where we are today. No, as I was said earlier, we're in a time of lifelong learning. And that applies to people in the workforce today. If I went back to when I was born, and if I went from there directly into today, I would not recognize today. But the opportunities today are much greater than when I was born. And I think we will see that, but we have to continue learning. We have to continue refreshing ourselves. And it is the thing that makes our countries grow. That economic growth will fuel job growth to help, instead of eliminating jobs, create many new opportunities. Last point, since the government quoted quite a few different statistics there. And if you begin to look in a study that was done recently in Germany, Germany lost 10 million jobs to technology, this study said. And they were positions that hurt people when they lost them. But that same study came back and said that the technology there created over 20 million new jobs in Germany. So yes, it lost 10 million, but there was a net growth of 10 million above what was lost, so 20 million jobs. Did technology lose jobs? Yes. Did technology create more jobs? Yes. And that's where the opposition says where technology is playing today. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Dr. Talib, if you have any point of information for this debate, you can.
No, thank you. I really want to support what the opposition said in terms of technology creating new jobs. It does create new jobs. And I think the government said that. The only thing is, what does the government do to accelerate this process? That's what we need to establish together. Because policies are not the same every government around the world. And governments have to know that without technology being geared towards creating new jobs, it would not by itself do that. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. You want to?
Well, the opposition agrees with Dr. Pebb totally that there is a role for government. There's a role for the commercial companies. There's a tremendous role for education. And for the society to benefit and to excel, those three stakeholders have to work together.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing done more and more around the world. We're seeing plans put in place to help re-educate classes of workers that their jobs are going to be eliminated to become better workers. And in most instances where jobs have been eliminated and the people retrained, they've moved to jobs that had higher salaries and enhanced capabilities. So the opposition agrees with that very strongly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, from the government side, I request Mr. Willie Hill.
Hi. Yes, one of the greatest things that I'm seeing now is innovation in what used to be a very hard topic in the digital space, the developers. Now we have no code, um, so you can build a whole digital platform without having to actually um, learn coding. So all this new no-code process, which opens up the door for a whole lot of people to get creative and start businesses online and not being kidnapped because you do not have the coding skills. So now with no code, the whole market's opened up for you. And within that, you can have a specialization um, so that no code now opens the door and you could get in and do whatever you area that you would like to work in. Um, the other thing I see happening is one of the industries that has a high um, incident rate or accident rate is the building industry. And now with technology, we've got contour crafting where houses get built like a 3D machine. And the time that it takes to build one of the houses is like 1/6 or 1/7 of the time spent in putting one house together. And the contour crafting just speeds up the process, and no part of it is left out. Like I mean, everything, even the electrical points in the house is already done incorporated into that. Really amazing. So that only came about with forward-thinking people that said, okay, this is if this happens, if this scenario happens, this is one of the things that we're going to need to do. And yeah, we just need a lot more forward-thinking people to enter this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I request from opposition side, Professor Donald.
Hi. Well, first off, I want to say that, interestingly enough, according to the World Bank, let me find this here. The we're basically losing. We're gaining more jobs than we're losing. I won't fish around for the number, but interestingly enough, there was an article in June 19th, 2021, which is right now, in The Economist, that said that during COVID, the amount of automation actually declined. It didn't grow, it shrank. And I think that that if you think of automation in a way, over the history of humans, we've constantly been changing our jobs. And even hunter and gatherers wound up harvesting different berries in different seasons and finding new ways to prepare food as they learn things from their neighbors and other things like that. So in a way, automation is replacing jobs, but it's of course producing more jobs than we're losing. But what I want to talk about is something more fundamental. It's like, what do humans really do? Like, if you look at the book, the Cybernetics by Norbert Wiener, who developed cybernetics, which is the science of control, which is what we use to make robots. It's the ability for robots to sense what they're doing so that they can adjust what they're doing. We couldn't have effective robots without that. So cybernetics. And he has this great line in there where he said that there's no way that a human being can compete with a steam shovel as an excavator. And he said, and the answer to that is that maybe competition isn't the key to what we're trying to do. He said, human beings do a range of things that computers can't do at all. And I think if you listen to what people are talking about, there's a fundamental assumption, which is that the goal for everything is to basically be a machine. We've developed a society which is quite dangerous in a lot of ways, and the only goal is growth. And I definitely think that, if you're a developing country and you don't have the basic infrastructure that you need to live a healthy and safe and secure life, I mean, it's only reasonable that you do. And the only way to do that is probably to be able to create economic growth that allows that to happen. But you eventually hit a limit. And something that happened historically is in the 50s in the United States, there was a big push to create a culture of competition, of economic competition, as a contrast to the Soviet model, which was more, in theory, it wasn't actually, but the theory was that it was going to be more collective. And so a variety of things happened, but basically we based our whole society on growth, and growth was measured completely by money. And if you think about that, the idea that people are moving labor to the places that are most conducive to the company's labor, what does that mean? It's the worse the working conditions, the cheaper the labor, the better it is for the company. And so we've got to the point where people are competing with robots. Right now, it's more expensive to automate a factory than it is to just move the factory to some state with low income taxes, or no income taxes, with no where environmental protection laws aren't enforced, and other things like that, so the workers can become cheaper than a machine. And we talk about innovation, and what we mean by innovation is developing things that we can sell and make more money for. And there's another sense of innovation and creativity, which is doing things that make human lives better. And a lot of that can be structural, organizational, things that don't have anything to do with material, particularly material things. And in order to do that, that requires creativity. And creativity is collaborative. Creativity isn't something that individuals do. And creativity, and building a culture of competition is building a culture where you're actually stifling creativity. So competition is not necessarily bad if you're thinking of it as playing a game. Like, I wrote a program at Hewlett-Packard that lots and lots of people used, and it made their lives better and stuff, and it was fun. I mean, was I doing it to make Hewlett-Packard more money? No, I wasn't. I was doing it because I had the opportunity and it was fun. So creativity can be something that makes our lives and society better in ways that aren't necessarily um, just for economic growth. And I'm not against economic growth, of course. I'm saying that we need to understand that that there's things that humans do and that human beings are doing all the time, and it's a job that they have that we're doing all the time. Right now, it's hard to replace robots in working with fine motor jobs, with things where you're trying to grab something and put it in a box that's irregularly shaped. And that's because human beings have innate creativity. Somebody that's trying to do a call center, God, I hate those things that where they have um, voice things where they say, well, have you done this? You know, you want to talk to this person, you want to talk to this department. I know enough about this technology that I wouldn't be calling if I had one of these simple-minded problems. So it's fighting to actually get to somebody to talk to them is insane. I hate those things. And though they might save the company money, I actually switched to companies where I can get a person that I can talk to help me with my problems. And yeah, I've just I would never use AT&T ever. They're just horrible because of their tech support. And the so the whole thing about lifelong learning and all of that, it's important, but what are we trying to teach people to be a, basically compete with a different kind of machine, or are we trying to teach people to use the human ability that humans have to be able to do the things that human beings, the empathy, creativity, um, and if we teach people to do that, they'll be able to adapt. They'll be able to look around and they'll be able to talk to the people around them, and they'll be able to understand the changes that are going on in their lives. And I think fundamentally that's our job. And I think fundamentally that's a job that we're going to keep for a very, very long time, because computers are very, very far from being able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now I think we
I
move to
think we
David
lost
Smith.
Sharif. We lost
Yeah, David
Sharif.
Smith does the close for the opposition now, I believe. David, you up?
Sure. Thank you so much for that. We hear the arguments on both sides, and we also understand that technology has become part of our daily lives today. And there's really no going back, as you see that. The pace is going forward, and we also know that technology complements labor, and it allows workers to be much more productive as we go towards the future. And we see that coming in times and times. Humans have much more to win than lose with technology development. And it can really go back and look at yourself other ways. One of the very interesting pieces of data is if you go back and look at farming, and you see that it took in the old times about 300 hours to uh, go through a hectare of grain and harvest it. And then we went to horse-drawn. That was cut by half. Now we've gone down to the machines doing it, and that 300 hours becomes 3 hours. Has technology helped us? Yes. And it's done in a way that helps the rest of the world to grow. And it's important to remind ourselves, though, that technology, automation, does not have a unified approach to job creation. And with Virginia on the line, I want to cite a study that I was when I was lecturing at FGV University in Brazil as part of a panel there. And Brazil is a great example of how technology can impact. So if you look in the 1990s and the 2000s, the country of Brazil put in place a series of measures to accelerate the pace of technology adoption and to accelerate technology literacy and put in place job training to begin to use it. So in Brazil, they have something called registered employees. So in those 2 decades, the number of people working increased from 23 million to over 50 million, attributed directly to the innovations of technology to do it. And you see that going on and on. Now, there's some places where it hasn't done that because the people did not want to take the opportunity to be retrained. They did not want to take the opportunity to advance themselves. And you have to have the ability to advance yourself, and governments and universities must play a role in doing that. So you have to be prepared for the future employments that are going to be offered for that. Uh, uh, the World Economic Forum did a survey a couple of years ago, and they looked at companies, and they found that almost 30% of them believe they have the right technology, the right people mix for the technology, and that they have openings because they're wanting to find more people who can use the technology. COVID did that to us. When we went from working and we had to rely on technologies in our home, it was the technology that got those people still getting paychecks versus being staying at home doing nothing. Did that help create new capabilities? Yes. So the task of upskilling and reskilling the workforce is huge and urgent, but it really is not insurmountable. It requires a constrained collaborative efforts between the governments, between the academia, between businesses and the individuals. That is what will drive our future economic growth. Uh, and the other economic forum research that came out very interesting to support this. They had a future jobs report recently, and it affirms that they believe that 75 million jobs will be lost as companies shift to more automation. But that same report said that more than 133 million new jobs will be created with technology developments, which will arrive in broader tandems, such as the expansion of the middle class in developing nations, new energy policies. So just looking at that, one statistic there from the World Economic Forum, innovation will create 58 million more jobs than the technology displaced. I think that's a pretty good upside. If I could get that type of returns on what I invest, I would be a happy person. And I think that's how we as the government should look at it, is the return on investment is very high when we see technology creating new job opportunities. Will some be lost behind? Yes. The people who used to pull ferry boats across rivers by pulling on ropes that were strung there, those jobs were lost. Well, they went on to other things. So technology is likely to continue to take jobs, but it's no closer to eliminating human labor today than it was 150 years ago. Humans have much more to win. Humans have many more job opportunities based on technology than we have to lose with technology development. And let me just go back to the same studies and reports that the government cited at the beginning. Jobs will be lost, but 85% of the jobs that are necessary in 2030 have not been created yet. Let's position our country, let's position our resources, let's position our capabilities to take advantage of this really wave of new opportunities, ways that will challenge us to be more creative, more innovative, and not doing the same old jobs that we were doing in the past. So that's the opposition's position.
Thank you, Honorable Opposition Leader for today's Parliament. Now I request Professor Rao for closing remarks.
Well, let's be clear. The debate was on whether technology will take jobs. And in this case, the opposition was in violent agreement. It will take jobs. The opposition argues that it will create more jobs than it takes. Certainly that's a possibility. Because we're talking about the future, and the argument was whether it took jobs in the first place. I think we can conclude that yes, technology will take jobs. But let's take the opposition side of the argument, which is whether or not technology will create new jobs, and what kinds of jobs will it create. According to the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, ever since the 1980s, where we began this very rapid advancement of technology, inequality has expanded dramatically. The rich got richer, the poor got poorer. Going back, and I know the opposition in previous debates likes to cite science fiction. I'll point to a Twilight Zone episode called The Brain Center at Whipple's, which kind of talks to this current trend. In that episode, it begins with the CEO discovering that automation is far cheaper than workers, and he starts automating the factory. And he continues to automate the factory until he only has really 2 people working for him. And the main person is the person actually repairing all the equipment. And then in the final moments of the episode, he comes in and he finds that Robbie the robot. That's why I remember the episode. Robbie the robot was there sitting in his chair, and he ends up sitting in the bar next to his maintenance person that he'd also laid off, grousing about the fact that now none of them have jobs because automation has taken them all over. And the big concerning stat, the stat that I provided before, was that 43% of the companies surveyed indicated that they're going to be cutting workers and displacing them with automation. That's 40. They didn't say, hey, but by the way, we're going to be hiring a bunch of different workers to do different things. Nope, the focus was on cutting. And if you look at how executive management is trained, they tend to be trained in cost cutting. If we look at 2 of the top executives that we follow, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they're both rather famous at this point for abusing workers. Musk was extremely upset that the California OSHA required him to shut down his factories to stop the spread of the pandemic. He thought it was unfair, and of course his reaction was to move the plant to Texas, where such an event would not occur. That is not in the workers' best interest, and he's also incredibly aggressive with automation. His factories have been very effective at removing workers from the factory for robots. I should point out the end result was a drop in overall quality, but that was something that kind of went by the wayside. Jeff Bezos heavily focused on automating his warehouses and is now credited with bringing unions back bringing unions into the technology segment, which up till recently had to a large extent been able to operate without unions. And when unions emerge, they emerge because workers are abused, and those workers then organize to stop the abuse. So with the patterns that we have in evidence right now, technology not only is taking jobs, it is shifting wealth to the very people that are making the decision to take jobs. And that same emphasis is not going back in to assuring these people are retrained and made available to the new jobs that are coming. A lot of the openings that we had at the beginning of the pandemic, openings in places like data scientists, remain as dire and unfilled as they were at the beginning of the underlying effort. We didn't shift. And if we look at inequality in education, we still see a large disparity in terms of minorities and women in critical areas that we need them. If we look at this panel, we're all still guys. There isn't much diversity on this panel. There isn't especially not sexual diversity on this panel, showcasing a huge problem with the technology segment that continues with regard to employing and promoting women at the very least. And it's far more dire in other areas. I know Donald likes to point out Finland often as a stellar example, and they are in this case. The PricewaterhouseCoopers concluded that Finland would be if you wanted to survive someplace, Finland only has a 22% risk of job displacement because they focused on jobs that are going to be very hard to displace, and they do an inordinate job in terms of retraining their people and ensuring those people have a place to land if something changes. David pointed out Germany. I've actually studied Germany at length, and what makes Germany unique is they very aggressively place jobs. If you take over a company in Germany, as Compaq discovered a few years back, when there was still a Compaq, you can't lay off people unless you can showcase you're losing money. Laying off people to increase profits is something that the German government absolutely disagrees with and fights. I did a review of Mercedes-Benz's factory a few years back and found that they had people doing jobs that were better done by machines, but those jobs have been protected by the government in lieu of those people being retrained to do something else. And so the government stepped in both those cases and assured the positive outcome of having people that were trained so they didn't have high unemployment. And also they helped assure that they didn't get the kind of inequality that exists in other places like the United States, where the wealthy tend to continue to get wealthier, and the people at the bottom don't move up into the middle class, end up without jobs and homeless. That disparity has been increasing rather dramatically in the United States, and so they would not be a great example of how to deal with this underlying problem. Finland would be a significant example of how to do this, and to a certain extent, Germany would as well. Though I tend to think Germany's policies tend to be somewhat short-sighted, in that they left people in jobs that are better and more successfully done by machines, when they should have been probably taking those people and more aggressively retraining them to do something else. Because, and give you an idea, one of the jobs I observed was a job where the computer shined a light on a box, the person picked the part out of the box, and it shined the light on another box, and the person had to figure out how to put it in the other box, and then put it in the other box. And that was the entire job. Part out of one box, part out of the other, which could have been done by an articulated arm far better. And I've got to believe that was not a job that engaged the individual to any great degree. It would have been incredibly repetitive and incredibly boring. But he still was employed. It's just that I think the better task would be to retrain and put them into something that was more meaningful. So in the end, while I agree with the opposition that technology can and will create more jobs, without government's aggressive action to assure that retraining, it won't happen. I should add that David pointed out switchboard operators. I was working for IBM when I did a study of what happened to switchboard operators when telecom came in and we had PBXs. They were laid off. They didn't get other jobs. They were the jobs they might have been able to do, which were secretaries and admins, were also being cut at that same time. So there was no surplus of those jobs for them to go into. So they were just laid off. They were let go. And why this became pertinent is it turned out that the people that were employing those switchboard operators were in the line to make decisions with regard to telephony switches, and then started throwing their body at that technology to prevent it from being installed so they could maintain their staff. I'd like to argue that we're doing that to preserve the jobs and the employment of the individuals, but staff meant power. And if you lost your staff, that meant you were probably going to lose your job as well. And so their motivation to save those jobs was not altruistic. It was because they didn't want to lose their jobs as well. And by the way, at the end, they failed. Executive management stepped in, drove the change anyway, and they were all laid off. And who knows what happened to them, because we all we know is they weren't reemployed by that company, and those companies did not retrain them. And that's the end. That's how business tends to operate. It tends to operate on a cost basis. There are companies that are exceptions. Hewlett-Packard, which I know several of us have worked for and with, tends to be very good about making sure employees have a soft landing. Cisco, another company that's really good about making ensuring employees have a soft landing. But if you look at newer firms that are run by people like Musk and Bezos, not so much. You might recall that at SpaceX, a series of employees spoke up about how Musk was damaging the company's image by his misbehavior. And instead of addressing their concerns, they just fired all of them. At Google, they've had a number of people, including their entire ethics board, stand up and say that the Google's misbehaving. And what did Google go? They got rid of the ethics board. So I don't think you can trust executive management wholeheartedly to do the right thing here and assure retraining. The history of them doing that is incredibly sparse, which is why government must take a role and ensure that the proper things are done to make sure that when those new jobs are created, that we have the people trained in country to do those new jobs, and they don't shift out of country to governments like the Finnish government or the German government that are doing a much better job of making sure those jobs are created and preserved. It's pretty sad to note if you look at where the best places are to go to live, they're almost never the largest, most powerful countries. They're almost always much smaller countries that do like Finland, do a much better job of taking care of their population. It is kind of funny because I look at Finland and given the amount of light they have there, think it must be a horrible place to live, but it's ranked right at the top as best places to live in the world because of the way they care for their people. So despite the environment that Finland is in, they've created such a favorable environment for their people that it ranks towards the top. So I think their process and their effort should be emulated, and that we as a government should look at them for guidance as opposed to looking at places like China or the United States, which are economically very powerful, but historically have not been great in terms of preserving the rights of employees or assuring that employees have a soft landing when these kinds of changes come. As Talib pointed out, the change is coming whether we want it to or not. It's our job to make sure our citizens are prepared for that change. They're trained to make the pivot, and they're able to do so without experiencing large-scale homelessness, the lack of food, clean water, or medicine. Those things are not available even today for much of the world. And fixing those underlying problems and making sure we have the people to do the jobs of the future is going to sustain us as a country going forward. The government rests.
Thank you, Professor Rauf, for your concluding remarks. Now I request our honorable debate analyst, Professor Dr. Talib Rafai.
Thank you so much. I applaud the government for its keenness to preserve rights of workers. I think that's very crucial, very important, because if we leave it up to the business only, businesses are going to just be greedy and look for the best way of create more profit. But Dr. David and Dr. Will are very correct in saying that there are more jobs created by technology than there are jobs lost, which is the crucial question in this debate. I think that we have to trust technology. We have to trust the human beings, Professor Rob. We have to trust ourselves. We can't just sit down there and criticize technology and say people are being laid off. Technology is creating more jobs, not directly, but indirectly. So I think that would be a very important thing to keep in mind. We should always keep in mind that workers are very important, but the workers are going to be replaced nowadays. There's a difference between a robot and a technological solution and a human being. The difference is in the emotion, as you said in our last meeting. Emotionally and judgmentally, humans cannot be replaced anyhow, but the jobs are changing. The literal manual jobs are not going to be there anymore. They're going to be replaced by a robot, that's for sure. But we need to make sure that the educational system produces the right kind of people to adjust to the new reality, because the new reality is what we're going to have to live with, whether we like it or not. Thank you very much, Sharif.
Thank you, sir. This is excellent debate, and I'm sure it will be very helpful for our audience, especially from Asia Pacific. Thank you, Professor David Smith, Professor Rob, and Dr. Talib Rafai for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you, our audience, those who regularly support our initiative. I request all of our content, it's 100% free. So any of our audience want to share our content with government agencies, corporation, and academy, you really can do that, and I'm sure this content will be very valuable for the youth community of Asia Pacific. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Sharif, you want to talk?